Welcome to our first origin seminar of this semester. We are very happy to have our own professor, Daniel Apai. Daniel is a professor of not only astronomy, but also planetary sciences and optical sciences. I don't know how he does that. He's a magician. So Dr. Daniel has been also Associate Dean for Research in the College of Science. He has been extremely busy. So he earned a PhD in astrophysics from Heidelberg University. And then he joined here a while ago as a postdoc when I was a postdoc as well. So Ilaria, me, and Daniel, we were postdocs at some point ago. And then you left to Baltimore. And then we were able to bring him back here as a faculty in 2011. And he's been here with us since then. And his primary research interest area is exoplanets, astrobiology, and doing some instrumentation stuff as well. He leads the NASA-funded Alien Earth astrobiology project right now, and there was another big project called Earth in Other Solar System. And he's mainly interested in exoplanets, obviously, habitability of nearby planetary systems, and he's also working on characterization of exoplanet and brown dwarf atmospheres and a lot of stuff. He's also leading a mission concept for space telescope constellation. There was his previous talks in YouTube videos. You can go and look for that specific talks about that. Daniel is also fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences and fellow of Exo Explorers Club. That's a lot of stuff. So now let's invite Daniel. Daniel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Serena. Thank you all for coming. And it's really exciting to see so many faces, many friends, and many new colleagues. What I wanted to tell you about today is a project that we worked on, many others, over the past four and a half years ago, over the past four and a half years. This has been a pretty challenging project, and I will explain you why. And I'm very happy that we actually found what we believe is a great solution to move forward for the field, and one that we hope will be influential and help guide us in the next steps of designing missions and searching for signatures of life beyond in the solar system and beyond. So I wanted to start by recognizing in part the Alien Earth team, Serena mentioned already, and I will add a little bit context on that too, but specifically the people who really helped a lot and made all of this possible. So this work was actually a result of a science working group within the NASA ICAR program. That's the Interdisciplinary Consortium for Astrobiology Research, basically part of NASA astrobiology program. And Rory Barnes from the University of Washington and I were co-chairing the science working group that shepherded this process. Matthew Murphy, who recently received his PhD from University of Arizona, has made very major contributions. Tim Lichtenberg and Noah Tuchot contributed very significantly, and Regis Ferrier, who's an ecologist in our EEB department, helped a lot. Kevin Wagner, also sitting here, Reno Malhotra. So we have quite a few people from locally and from the astrobiology community who helped with this. Okay, so let me start a little bit just to give you a context of how did we end up executing this project, why, and what's the bigger context. So Serena mentioned our Alien Earth project. And Alien Earth is really a continuation, an indirect continuation of a previous project that we started, which was called Earth in Other Solar Systems, or EOS. Both of these now have provided, and both of these have a lead institution here, the University of Arizona. I'm the PI of both, have provided over a decade of funding, and both for fundamental research, curiosity-driven research in many ways, if you like, but also with a very strong strategic focus on supporting exoplanet missions, both the science cases and the mission planning and interpretation. So I think it's useful, especially for those of you who are new to this community, to learn a little bit about these two projects. So EOS started in 2014. We submitted a large proposal that was a $6 million proposal that went on until 2021. And then we were able to successfully propose successor project, not a direct, but an indirect continuation that started in 2021, that is Alien Earth. So these basically have been hubs, multidisciplinary hubs. Most of the funding is coming here. We have been supporting 40 plus researchers worldwide. And I think about 25 grad students and postdocs. Probably the actual number is a bit larger, but so it really made us a major impact, I think, on the local community, but also just on the, I would say, the whole exoplanets field as a whole. We are tracking publications. We exceeded recently 260 refereed papers from this project. So that's a very substantial impact. And we have quite a few papers that received over 100 citations. So I think arguably we made, as a community, a significant impact on the field. And this allowed us not just to focus on short-term projects, but really think big term, big long-term and big questions that couldn't be addressed in smaller projects. So we have been working with other ICAR teams and astrobiology teams. Some of the work then also spawned other projects. So we have, I will touch on a little bit on these, but the actual impact of bringing in more funding, making more research possible, supporting more students and postdocs to address bigger questions, I think has been substantial. The key question that we have been pursuing in Alien Earth, and we are still pursuing, the project is still going on, is which nearby planetary systems are likely to harbor habitable planets and life. So it's I like this question because it's a broad question, a lot fits there, but it still gives us a pretty good direction of what is relevant, what is not, how to make progress. Or formula, if I would tell you what is the secret to getting $12 million funding from a funding agency, as in this case, it was not just, we are competing with excellent teams for getting the funding. Everybody's really good in the final selections. I think what made a difference for us is that we were able to directly tie the fundamental research that we propose to execute to exoplanet missions and NASA mission priorities. So what we have been, basically the secret here is really doing planet formation and demographics with everything, including the stars, planetary systems, combine this with scientific hypothesis and exoplanet mission simulator so that we actually can deliver new science, new tools, and also guidance for missions. So shaping missions, shaping investments for the community. So what you will see today will be one of the major deliverables from this project too. Before we go there, I wanted to touch on a little bit on Alien Earth and just show you this was the proposal cover. You see the central question I mentioned highlighted there, but maybe more important is really the scope. So how we organize this is in 4 modules. These modules are linked together. So there's information flow and methodology flow from the modules. Module 1 is focusing on the conditions and timeline for planet formation. Module 2 is looking at the impact of planet formation pathways on the planet composition, the emerging planetary systems. Then here we are looking at the habitability of nearby planets and factors that would compromise that. And then finally, we are folding all of this together to inform exoplanet missions. So what we learn is not just confined to shelves or printers and PDF files, but really shaping missions. And the key part of this has been to tackling habitability. Habitability is, I will point out, explain, it's a fairly complex term that we use, we base a lot on. And so we found that was something that needed improvement. This kind of shows you the multiple different frameworks and efforts that we developed to support missions across the Alien Earth team. So this is, I will mention you probably know some of these frameworks, but we have done a lot of work on describing the transit light source effect that impacts transiting exoplanet missions and characterizations. We predicted before the launch of James Webb that James Webb science for transiting planets will be limited by the fact that we don't understand the host stars correctly. And that turned out to be a correct prediction. And this, in large part, this was the work of Ben Rackham, a PhD student here, who went on to lead many studies to characterize stellar contamination. And that actually in January, we will be launching a dedicated space telescope, Pandora, to study this effect. So this is led by the Goddard Space Flight Center, and we are doing mission operations here in the Apai Research Building, and I'm leading the exoplanet science working. But it's also informing James Webb. We have a series of projects linked to Bioverse, which is allowing us to assess which science questions are the right science questions for next generation surveys, whether from the ground or from space. So we have published a whole series of papers on this, and this continues to influence also the largest ground-based telescopes and future space-based missions. We have worked, this is in large part Gijs Mulder's, Fred Chesla, Ilaria's work on developing the Genesis database. It's a large library of synthetic simulated planetary systems that emerge under different assumptions, so that based on that we can make predictions for what may be detectable and what may be found by future missions. I will speak today about the quantitative habitability framework, but I wanted to mention briefly that we developed this framework too, Dynamite, that allows one to take a look at an incomplete planetary system, and most of the planetary systems that we know, we don't have a complete understanding. With Dynamite, we can predict where may be the missing planets in these systems, and we can predict which methods would be possible to detect them. So this has been quite successful. This is the work of Jamie Dietrich, who has done her PhD dissertation here too. And then I will mention also a lot of work Ilaria's group has been leading on planetary current traits and demographics, refining eta-errors, which again is critical for missions. So taken together, I think this is a very substantial body of methods and results that help shape the future of exoplanet science. Today, I will be focusing on the upper right, the quantitative habitability framework. So we heard about habitability probably for 60, 70 years in the astrophysical context, and one may ask the question, why do we still need to define habitability? Isn't that already well defined? And so I think habitability has always been interesting, but it's becoming more and more important. And we really need a good definition. I will explain you why we don't have a good definition, but it's interesting to put this in context that there is, and this is an incomplete list, but I just went online and I searched for different claims of potential detections of life. And this is incomplete. I'm sure that I'm missing probably at least half of them. But there have been, over the past decades, claims of potential signatures of life that, of course, always received very significant attention. And this is probably arguably accelerating as we are entering the realm of exoplanets, and we have more and more detailed chemical information also about solar system bodies. Oftentimes, a key component in interpreting these potential detections is asking the question, are they actually coming from environments where that are habitable? So, for example, the DMS detection, maybe the latest one, and I think there was a lot of discussion, and I don't really want to go too much into that in this talk. K218b is a sub-Neptune, which was proposed to have potentially, there are a variety of interior structures that are possible for this planet, but it is possible, it was proposed that it may be a Hycean world that would be basically an ocean, water ocean, beneath hydrogen atmosphere, and James Webb spectra suggested that there may be evidence for DMS. It's a dimethyl sulfide. It's a molecule that on Earth is mostly produced by biology, and it was suggested that maybe this is a biosignature. So this was very interesting. In the literature, there was a lot of focus on figuring out the significance level of that detection. The initial paper put it between 2.8 to 3.1 sigma. So there were many, many papers, people reducing the data and arguing whether it's 2.5 sigma or maybe 3.1 or 1.8. I think a more interesting and more difficult question is there actually an ocean in this world? Is that actually possible? Is this a habitable environment? And this is not the talk where I will answer that question, but I will be focusing more on the bigger methodology on how we can attack these questions, because I think this is going to be important. I would argue that if you look forward, NASA say, let's assume NASA builds the Habitable Earth Observatory 25 years from now, we will have very similar data on some of the Earth-sized planets like we have now on sub-Neptunes, and we'll be asking very similar questions. And it will be essential that we have an understanding of what is a habitable environment, what is not, and it gets more complicated. So again, we are considering as a field, as scientists, and really as a nation, and internationally major investments into facilities that are in large part driven by the science goal of identifying habitable environments, characterizing them, and interpreting correctly the signal that's emerging there. So these are some of the biggest projects considered. There are others too. It's not a complete list, but if you think about HWO or the extremely large telescopes on the ground, these are massive investments. We really want to see them succeed, but we want to make sure that the science that they are built on for the science goal is also robust. So the habitability definition and our ability to actually identify what is a habitable environment drives mission definition. It will drive target prioritization. And then ultimately it is providing a prior to the biosignature interpretation. So we have to have that sorted out. If you think about the habitable Earth observatory, if you just need one single argument why this is important, it's in the name. We need to be able to articulate what is a habitable planet, really. We need to be able to quantitatively compare 2 or 3 or 4 planets and figure out which is more likely to be habitable. I would argue if we are serious about really making a mission like that reality. So you would think that all of this has been figured out. So part of our science working group, what we spent a substantial amount of time is that we went and we downloaded and studied and analyzed all the strategic reports in the past 25 years. So this was significant effort, and several of us, including Matthew Murphy, have done really significant work on this. We went through all of these reports. We looked for the words habitable and related terms and studied basically how this is handled. So I would say that the word habitable is present everywhere. So it's very significant. Typically, for example, Astro 2020 mentions 150 times the term habitable, but it doesn't provide a definition. And it's not, they are not the only one. Almost none of these. There were 2 reports that attempted to come up with a kind of a working usage, not a real definition, but just explanation of what they mean by that. So what I would say, I want to highlight here that we are not criticizing in any way those reports. As you see, it took us 4 years to actually come up with a framework because it's a really difficult problem and it's complex. And it just really didn't make sense for those reports to try to do that. That was not their scope. One more clarification here. Habitability is not the same as the habitable zone. So I would argue that for the classical habitable zone, we have a pretty good definition. We all agree. But the media often gets confused, and even some of our scientist colleagues get confused when they speak about a planet in a habitable zone and assume that that is a habitable planet. That's not the same. The moon is in the habitable zone. If you would move Jupiter in the habitable zone, it would be in the habitable zone. It would be a habitable zone planet, but it would not be a habitable planet like it. So there is a difference between a zone, which is referring to a volume, a shell around a star, in which if you place a planet that is pretty similar to Earth in its climate feedback, you would be able to stably maintain an Earth-like surface temperature. That's kind of the habitable zone, but it doesn't mean that every planet that is there is habitable. It doesn't mean that planets outside are not habitable. So that's where the confusion starts, and it will amplify. So habitable in a common use, this is what the Oxford Languages Dictionary, they define it as habitable as suitable or good enough to live in. And so most of the people in the world, if you tell them habitable planet, this is kind of what they will be thinking about. We have to make sure that we don't confuse them, especially if we ask them to fund a $12 billion mission. We have to make sure that the nomenclature we use is correct. Now, I want to point out that, so it's very interesting. We have a paper summarizing all of this. It's a fairly lengthy paper, worth reading every single page. It's a great study. There is lots of interesting aspects, everything from philosophy to linguistics, to planetary science, and of course, extremophiles. But I found the most interesting that we had to actually delve pretty deeply in some of the kind of the philosophy underpinning all of this. One thing that I will point out in terms of methodology, and that's described in this paper, is that these studies actually rely on the process of elimination. It's usually, in fact, I think it's never stated, but that's the process they involve. So they basically say that the probability that a planet is habitable is in a sense a product of probabilities that, for example, that this is a planet, it's the probability that it has an atmosphere, a probability that it's in the habitable zone, a probability that it's Earth-sized, etc. So this is very powerful, but there's a trap. The process of elimination is powerful, especially in this situation, because if I show for any one of these terms that is near zero, then the product will be zero. So if it's not an Earth-like planet, it's a Jupiter-sized planet, then the probability that it's an Earth-like planet is zero, so the product will be zero. It doesn't matter what are the other terms. Okay, so this is nice because we can make a headway by sorting out the planets that are not likely to work. The difficulty is that this is asymmetric. Unless you have a complete and full understanding of all the probabilities involved and you know all the terms that are involved, you cannot actually calculate this probability. It means while you can exclude targets, you cannot prove that any of the targets is habitable unless you have a full and complete understanding of all the terms. So the reports focus arguably on, understandably on the process of elimination, but that will only get you so far and will not bring you to the final goal. So, and you could make similar arguments also on the solar system side. This basically is a problem that is a challenge that was for solar system earlier, so also, but also for exoplanets. Okay, so we formed a quantitative habitability science working group. I proposed this in 2020. I argued to the astrobiology program that it is essential that we face this challenge. It's a complicated one, but we need a consensus. We need to work on this and come up with something that is going to work. So this was approved, and I was co-chairing it. First, I was the lone chair for the first 2 years, but then Rory Barnes joined, and together we pushed these projects through the final half. We invited the community. We had participation from over 100 participants. We started with a workshop. So this was the program of the workshop, just lots of really cool, interesting talks. I will say that when we invited people to the workshop, I expected somewhere between 15 and 22. And I thought, okay, if we get that number, that's a success. But we had over 100 people signing up right away. So there was a lot of interest in this, and workshop was great. We created different communication channels to ensure that we involve, engage the community, get ideas from them, and communicate to them. We created an online hub. We had a web page with resources. We created an ADS library, and then also the code that we developed was also shared on GitHub. So this was, while a smaller core group really pushed for this with this project, there was broad community engagement. Okay, so problems with the habitable. Why it is difficult? It sounds so simple, but then the devil is in the details. So one of the results of the workshop was we asked people about what the definitions of habitability should, fulfill, what the ideal definition should be. And so we got basically a whole, many very good arguments. I think we only got good arguments. The problem was that they were often orthogonal. So you hear things like, it should not be restricted to life on Earth-like planets. I think that's fair. Should be applicable to both species and ecosystems. I think that's true. Should be flexible enough to remain useful for many decades. I wouldn't argue with that. Should consider the planetary and the planetary system context. Okay. Should not be restricted to Earth-like life. Also valid. Should not be restricted to surface life. Again, a good point. All of these are pushing it to a more universal and a more comprehensive definition. Okay, it becomes more complex. On the other hand, especially people who design systems that we would want to launch in space, for example, or the largest ground-based telescopes, they want something that has well-defined terms, so that it's really applicable. It should be applicable given realistic data, right? We will have very limited data even in the future about Earth-like planets, so it should be useful even with limited data. I would, and others also argue that it should be understandable to non-scientists. We cannot just ask people, taxpayers, to give $12 billion and telling them that we study habitable planets, and then we say, oh, yeah, but that's not what you think it means. And it should be also consistent with past uses. So these push you towards more specific and simpler definition that can be deployed. So at the end, we kind of concluded that no single definition of habitability is going to work. We need a more nuanced framework and something that is probabilistic and is quantitative. And this also came up, right, that when is a terminology useful? So this was kind of eye-opening to me. If you think about science, science is full of poorly defined terms that we keep on using for hundreds of years because it's so difficult to change them. And so all the astronomers, we all, of course, memorize when we are young, this magic sequence of letters. Yes. Planetary nebula, they are not really planets. They don't really have too much to do with planets. Hadeaners is not really as it was imagined here. The blue-green algae, they are not algae. And you could go on. There is plenty of terms in biology that are just historical terms. We use them because it's so difficult to change, but they are wrong. Now, it is important. The language is important because also we communicate non-scientists, and also within science, we have different disciplines that are represented. So I have to be able to understand what the biologist is talking about, and if the terms are misleading, that may be difficult. So part of the paper is dedicated to understanding pitfalls and good terminology. And you may think that it is, and I will get back to that in a moment. So let me get back to that in a moment. So there's another problem here. And I think ultimately the root of the problem with habitability, once we converge it, if we really don't have a definition for life. If I had a universal definition of life, and from that, I could derive the requirements for that life, and then I could say any environment that matches those requirements is then habitable. We don't have that. So, in fact, there are papers in the literature arguing that it's futile to search for biosignatures, it's futile to search for extraterrestrial life via biosignatures, because we will never be able to interpret it because we don't know what a life is. Now, I would argue, I thought about this, and I would say there were moments of desperation when I faced with the science working with some of these. These are significant challenges. But the reality is that in science, we work around imperfect definitions. Missing, how many of you are planetary scientists here? Hands up, don't be shy. What is a planet? Yeah, so basically, even for the planet, right, the definition of a planet, whether Pluto is a planet or not, or which exoplanet is a planet, even that, we don't have as good a definition as we would like, but we can work around it. As long as we basically have a way to have a language that we can refine, work in systems of terms, rather than just applying labels too broadly. So we argued in the paper and we demonstrate that this is all possible. Now, there are other pitfalls in a terminology. So we may come up with a great terminology, but if nobody's using it, it made no impact. So we wanted to do something that is adopted widely, and for that, we don't only write a paper, we actually developed a quantitative framework. There is now a Python program that you can download, an interactive visualization framework as of now. And then we also provided examples to show that it works in different use cases, so that you basically can connect your project to this framework, and everybody can use the same framework with the same assumptions. So there are a couple of other pitfalls here, and in the paper there's more, so I will maybe just move forward for the sake of time. But there are really, these are things one, I think, is right to think through when defining terminology or proposes how to move forward in a field, because sometimes we can introduce terms that don't have a long shelf life and then just lead to confusions later on. So we have, I will just mention, I already pointed out, we have now basically a paper on this. It appeared in July 2025. It was about a 4-year effort to get to this point. It's a very comprehensive paper, both the terminology, the Python implementation, the use cases and examples are there. Okay, so what is the solution? I told you all the problems and why it is difficult to do, but we were able to provide a framework that we believe is actually really addressing these points and help the field move forward. So the framework is basically starting with some clarification what we really mean by a framework and definitions here. It's not an absolute measurement or not a statement. an absolute statement. So what does it mean? Basically, when we say that something is or isn't habitable, we really don't want to give an absolute statement. We want to talk in a probabilistic term, and we want to reflect that really our classification or our characterization of that environment is really a result of model comparison, in which we can use and propagate uncertainties and incomplete data, but we can do that correctly. And then at the end, we have a quantitative result that reflects that. So ultimately, all the studies, people have tried to define habitability in the past, and there are different approaches to that, but none of them checks all the boxes that we have identified. But generally, what people, if you look at the habitable zone definition too, which is again not the same as habitability, but it attempts in some ways to build on a simplified version. What it does there is that it says if there is liquid water, then there could be life. So what it is basically liquid water, the presence of liquid water is in a sense equivalent in that prescription with life, the conditions life requires. And there are good reasons for that, but it's a very implicit assumption. The reality is that, of course, we know that there's, even on Earth, life requires much more than that. But in a sense, what we argue is that the best way to do this is to have two models and compare them. One is a model for the habitat, and the other one is the model for the metabolism. So we use metabolism here, and I will touch on this a little bit later, as a kind of a stand-in for a scale-free description of life. So it could apply to a single cell, a single organism, a species, an ecosystem, okay? We use metabolism because organisms that share the same metabolism usually are surviving viable under those very similar conditions, so it makes sense. We clarify what we mean there. But it is basically a habitat model and the metabolism model comparison. The habitat model predicts what are the conditions. So it could be pressure, temperature, pH, etc., photon flux, etc. And the metabolism model tells you that as a function of the available environmental conditions, will this or metabolism be suitable, be viable or not? Okay, so it sounds fairly simple. Basically, oftentimes people just use liquid water as the habitat model, and then kind of ignore the metabolism model and just say if there is a habitat model, for the habitat model, you would derive predictions for your planet, and then you would use the liquid water as the metabolism model. Okay, what we wanted to do is basically much more transparent, having these two models and allow a quantitative comparison between them. So this is basically what the framework looks like. So you have the habitat model here and the metabolism model here. I will just walk through what goes in here. You may not be able to read it from the back in the room. So this is the habitat model that predicts the probability distribution of environmental conditions in your potential habitat. And then this is the metabolism viability model that predicts whether the metabolism would be viable given the conditions. So the habitat model is something that can be informed by priors. It could be priors on our planet or environmental properties. This could also be applied to the solar system. In fact, we do in our models. But it's also informed by data on specific planets and environments. So if you, for example, have an excellent data set of Mars, then you don't need many priors because you know most of the things, at least on the surface. But then if you want to model the subsurface for Mars, you actually will need priors because we have very limited understanding of what's beneath the surface. So you want to be able to combine these two types of information, more generic and more specific, into a probabilistic model. And then you want to compare this to the metabolism model. That's, again, pretty similar. We have information on terrestrial organisms, and large part of the paper was actually going through different extremophiles and temperature and pressure conditions in which they live. But you could also supplement this with theoretical, maybe first principles-based considerations. Then, for example, how would it look how different it would look if the chemistry would be different, or pressure, temperature conditions. Could you have life in a not using water as a solvent? And while we didn't include that in the paper, that is definitely a potential that this framework can facilitate. And so you can, by a comparison of these two, you get the habitat suitability assessment. And we can implement this in a Monte Carlo fashion. So all of this is Monte Carloed out, and that means that uncertainties and incomplete data can be treated correctly. We can also fold in priors to handle missing data. And then we can propagate those uncertainties through, and you will be able to assess the habitat suitability. Okay, so we implemented this. This was the model. It took about a year to converge on this, and then we said it has to actually work, and people have to see that this is working and that they can use it for their planets or mission design. So we created a Python implementation. This is a modular Python-based framework. We are providing a small, and they are expanding the library of organisms, metabolisms that we are including. And we have a slowly growing library of habitat models too. We started with exoplanets like TRAPPIST-1e, TRAPPIST-1F-like planets, have a Mars subsurface and a Europa ocean model. So the program itself, you basically create modules. These modules can be either priors or it can be calculating properties. And the program will actually build an acyclical graph that shows basically the information flow. Here, the red dots, I think I have other ones with zoomed in. The red nodes are priors and starting information, and the blue ones are calculated. So you may, for example, start with the orbital parameters of the planet, the stellar parameters of the planet, calculate the insolation, fold in a simple energy balance model for the atmosphere, calculate the surface temperature. You can fold in also pressure model to calculate the pressure, and then you have predictions in your habitat model for the location and the conditions there. So this is auto-generated. You define the modules, and you can, that is nice because you can relatively easily create new habitats by reusing modules that either others or we build. Okay, so, and it's available on GitHub. I will tell you a little bit more about this. So metabolism model is a key part of this, and I will again emphasize that we had great help from biologists, in particular Regis Ferrier's group and Antonin Affolder, who has been a postdoc here, who have worked extensively on this topic. They have been advising us on how to implement the metabolism models. And so I mentioned already that we adopted a scale-free approach. We wanted that it works for an individual cell, an individual organism, a species, or a whole ecosystem. So you can build all of these models. You always know every model has a limitation, so you have to keep that in mind. But the framework itself works. Could be based, and currently it is based on terrestrial or terran life. But the framework is consistent with, if you would like to speculate about how life may look on Titan, and you have physical and chemical constraints, that is something that the framework can support if the module is written. And a key point here is that, especially for exoplanets, there are so many uncertainties in the parameters that we measure. So it's very important to be cognizant of that and then represent those uncertainties in the final result. So this framework, the Monte Carlo implementation, allows you to basically have a combined uncertainty at the end and not kind of ignore or lose some of the assumptions that go with. So we have a starting metabolism library with simpler examples, and we are building in complexity and scope. We have the initial library has methanogens, for example, and cyanobacteria implemented. These are relevant because they are some of the simplest organisms, and then also cyanobacteria is a major oxygen producer that has been contributing to or maybe driving the great oxygenation event on Earth, transforming Earth's atmosphere and even the redox state of the whole planet. So these are meaningful starting points for exploring what, for example, oxygenic photosynthesis as a biosignature could be, how it could be modeled. So we are currently considering a fairly simple set of parameters, pressure, temperature, pH, and we are working towards expanding those. We are running against actually sometimes the limits of what is known about these organisms, so that's fun. I really enjoyed learning about extremophiles both in the deep ocean and then also in the Himalayas, up high altitude, UV radiation, desiccation. So there's a lot of good stuff there that was fun. As an example, for archaea, we wanted to determine what is the pressure limit at which they would exist. And it turned out to be more important than I appreciated before. For archaea on Earth, the deepest location where archaea were isolated were actually just down to about 2 kilometers. So it's more limited than I appreciated. It's not to say that there can be at greater depths, but they haven't been isolated and found there. So they live there at high temperatures. But that is really just basically a relatively small part of the volume of the Earth. And comparing the pressures to, for example, Europa's ocean, that's really just the top. So, and not to, let alone speaking about sub-Neptune. So these are examples. We use specific species and data from them to drive our metabolism models. And this was, to me, was very fun going after some of these crazy organisms like the Himalayan midge. That is the record holder for eukarya living at lowest temperatures. But okay, I want to just to wrap up quickly. So I mentioned the habitat models. We basically have developed examples for planetary surfaces, atmospheres, planetary interiors, and these typically have an energy balance model that is coupled to planetary orbit, insolation, and we have simple geothermal gradients, usually for the interior, informed by the available data. But sometimes it basically has significant uncertainties because we don't understand the geothermal gradient in Mars, for example. So we demonstrated running the framework in 1D, but the whole framework is adopted that it could be done in a 4D model, so 3 spatial and 1 temporal coordinates. We have done TRAPPIST-1E and F, and these are, I would say, E and F-like planets. We still don't know a lot about TRAPPIST-1E and F, so we took models that show that proof of concept, the framework can work in those cases. It doesn't mean that these are not the best possible models of TRAPPIST-1E and F, or there is no such thing yet. We done Mars subsurface and Europa's ocean. So we wanted in the paper to show to the community that this is not just an idea and terminology, but it's actually something that is working and you can use it in your everyday work. So we did 4 use cases. One is exoplanet prioritization. Here the task is, the hypothetical task is that you have your favorite exoplanet telescope and you need to figure out, how do I prioritize planets that all seem to be exciting targets? And so just to keep it simple, we said, imagine that you have to decide between TRAPPIST-1E and TRAPPIST-1F. How do I decide which is a better target? That's actually relevant already for James Webb, but going in the hopefully near future, more and more times we will be facing this question. And I think oftentimes we end up going after the easier to observe target, which is maybe the right answer, but here we provide what I think is a better approach. Biosignature interpretation is another one. I mentioned the DMS detection in K218b. Imagine that 20, 25 years from now, or maybe sooner, we will be detecting oxygen. Is the oxygen coming from a planet that is actually suitable for oxygen photosynthesis or not? That's basically a fundamental question that we have to understand if we want to make use of that potential detection. Martian subsurface is an example. We wanted to show solar system examples too. So it's not just an exoplanet framework. We wanted something that's working across. And so we looked at the methanogens, habitability, suitability, the viability of methanogens as a function of depth, the Martian subsurface, and then similarly for Europa's oceans. So this is the first question: should we observe TRAPPIST-1E and TRAPPIST-1F? We built a model for both of these planets. It's similar, but the parameters are different. It's basically using as priors the orbital parameters of the planet, the star, uses an energy balance model to calculate the surface temperature and pressure, and then compares that. These are some of the red is prior and blue as calculated values, and then compares that, for example, surface temperature and pressure, and compares that to the viability, in this case of archaea methanogens. And so you can see that in the part of the model temperature range and pressure range, they are viable. So that's the red dots. Part of it, they are not. I will again say that it's all model comparison. So the result is only as good as your models. And that's okay in science. That's what we do, but it's important that this is not forgotten. So given basically the models, this is the probability with which they would, or habitat model predicts conditions, that is, or metabolism model predicts is suitable for that organism. It is, even though it's incomplete and uncertain, but this is the fact. This is, I think, a correct representation of or information. This helps us. We did this study for both plants, and then you have a basis to identify which one fits better your ability, for example, to detect biosignatures that would be associated with methanogens. Another example is O2 is detected in a planet, but is it habitable? So we went back, TRAPPIST-1E and F, we tweaked it a little bit, and I don't show the model, just the final result. What is interesting here is that you get basically, in both cases, there is a part of the parameter space where they are habitable, and in this case for cyanobacteria. So you need something that produces oxygen. We took cyanobacteria because on Earth that's the most significant one. It is interesting that cyanobacteria and oxygen photosynthesis is actually limited to a much narrower temperature range than liquid water. So if you went with liquid water, you would say both of them are pretty good. But actually, if you consider that oxygen photosynthesis is only working in a limited temperature range, some of the planets that may host liquid water are unlikely to host oxygen photosynthesis if the chemical complexity and the pathways are similar to that we know from Earth. So these are non-trivial results that, just going with the liquid water, you would have, went in with a more simplistic interpretation. Martian subsurface, this is similar here. We demonstrated that the framework can be deployed as not just as a basically 0D surface, but in 1D as a function of depth. And so this shows habitat suitability, viability, basically as a function of pressure, and at some point temperature and pressure are limiting where your methanogens would be viable. We basically applied similarly to Europa's oceans. These all have different models themselves, but the concept is basically similar. We looked at the pressures, temperatures that our models for Europa's subsurface ocean would predict, and then we compare them to methanogens, the conditions in which in Earth we know that they live. And that is interesting. We found this is something, again, that I think I did not appreciate and were not really represented in the literature too, that much of Europa's deep ocean has much higher pressures than Earth's ocean. And it is not so clear that actually in the deep ocean, much of the volume of the ocean or archaea, for example, would survive. Okay, so our final steps are basically we are working towards providing this. We published it, we showed proof of concept examples, and then we are working towards providing this really as a standardized platform for the community. I wanted to highlight Rahul Rathor's work. He's an undergraduate student, computer sciences, who has been working with me to basically clean up all the spaghetti code the astrophysicists put together. So Rahul has built an interactive, it's still work in progress, but he built an interactive GUI-based analysis framework that you can see here. We cleaned up the documentation, there are examples, there's an updated website. We are constantly adding features to this, so we want to make this very both user-friendly and useful for others. And then we'll be also connecting to other more sophisticated planetary atmosphere models. Kylie Hall, who is sitting here, is starting now. So Kylie will be working on using the quantitative habitability framework. One of the potential projects we are looking at is exactly the high CM words and ocean words. I will highlight also the work of Veronica Clavender, who was also advised by Matthew Murphy, Veronica is an undergraduate student, biology student, and she has used the quantitative habitability framework to explore the habitability of lakes in the ice layer of Europa. These very likely exist often below the chaos regions, and they take a long time to freeze over. So they provide intermediate length habitats potentially. And then we are working with Regis's group and others on developing metabolism and then also habitat models with matter scientists and exoplanet scientists. So this is basically, I'm coming to the end. So I think habitability is really important. And I think before this framework, we really didn't have a quantitative way that we could uniformly talk about it. I'm hoping that our work helped address that need. So we now have, with input from over 100 scientists, a framework that we can widely apply, both in exoplanets, solar system, ask questions, and then add to it in terms of better understanding terrestrial life, and then also exploring how extraterrestrial life may look different. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Well, questions from audience first.
This might be a stupid question, but I promise that it leads to, I guess, something more interesting. If you put all the parameters or priors into the model, like the probability is gonna drop, is gonna result 100%, right? Like that is the model fixed in that way.
Yeah, so it really depends what you put in. So what are the uncertainties? If we put in the best data on Earth today, you will get basically 100%.
Okay. Yeah, and that was my next question. Like, how much of the priors you can take away until it start to see that 100% start to decrease? Or
that's a very interesting question, and it's very relevant for especially experiments that aim to find Earth-like planets. Right? What is the minimum information that you need to? So we haven't done that, but this framework could support that. So you could just basically start to increase the uncertainties, strip away the data. We have kind of went from the other way of adding, building, from lowest complexity to higher and going there. But we haven't. We hope to, but we haven't done a trade study, for example, a detailed study for future exoplanet missions yet.
Yeah, I was seeing that in the same way that the entire area of studying the sun as a star is studying the Earth as an exoplanet.
Yeah, you're right. But
maybe related to the last question. So this is fascinating. But my question is, at the end of the day, will you be taken somewhere else besides doing the obvious thing that is one place we know that life exists here, so we look for here. There's a lot of speculation, as to how life can exist elsewhere, but that also incurs a tremendous amount of uncertainty. And so, build a telescope. I'm wondering if all this is still going to lead me to looking for Earth's around G-type surfaces to know that works.
So, that's a very good question, obviously. So I think ultimately there will be basically a risk cost assessment and what people are. So what they will decide, I cannot tell you. What I can tell you is that with this framework, you can actually say that I can set up hypotheticals for how life would look, say, under an M dwarf. And then I can from that derive basically a habitability assessment that can guide the observations. So we can be really transparent about our assumptions and then our conclusions. I will say that James Webb now is used to look for biosignatures around non-sun-like stars. So it's clear that there is an appetite and interest and already investments into moving away from G dwarfs. But I think there wasn't a quantitative framework to allow basically experiments really well planned before. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Eugene?
Okay. Kind of related as well. I wanted to know if you intended to perhaps use like some machine learning with that framework so that you could explore, for instance, you could have surprises like, oh my God, I never would have thought that that set of conditions would lead to habitability. And are these planets that we could hope to find? Since we don't have the luxury to take a look at them one by one, we can play with them.
That is interesting. So I thought about machine learning in a different way, but not this way. Maybe there is the way I thought about this, but that may be, I'm not sure it's a good idea. What I would like to have is basically an assessment of basically given all the literature on biology, pull together all the constraints we have on multi-dimensional limits of life. Because usually what you have is temperature limits, pressure limits. And so there is a significant, I think, literature mining aspect. And I thought about maybe using AI for that. Maybe machine learning, maybe that is a good idea. I think at this point, I think oftentimes what we know about exoplanets is limited enough that we could just basically, run this thing for 2 days and go through all of them. But it's you may be right, maybe post-aerial, or there may be situations where, I mean, you could certainly run it with an ML. I'm just wondering, what is the cost benefit? At which point does it become the better approach? But yeah, it's an interesting idea.
Okay, anybody from online audience, do you have a question? Please raise your hand if you do. Okay, the last question. Yeah.
I think I didn't get the idea of the metabolism models. So you said that they can be based on life here on Earth or not, like using a hypothetical. So my question is, how can we compare with something that we don't know even? Or how reliable is that?
So basically how we approach it is that we have models, right? So we can say we have, for example, we didn't do yet a hypothetical life model exactly because it was speculative and it was not the first priority. But you could say we developed the model, I can call it model A for Titan. And so we would look at basically a life that based on thermodynamical consideration, basic chemical consideration, I would say I identify a chemical reaction that could fuel that metabolism, and then I could derive based on thermodynamics a temperature range for it to operate, and then maybe that simple temperature range could be a very simplistic model. And so we could say for given that model and this model for Titan, this is the probability that they are compatible. That's how you would build it. It is actually, I think, yes. So that hopefully that answers your question. I would say that the speculative hypothetical life, it's interesting. I think you go to most astronomers think that like out there anything would be possible. But if you go to a biologist, most biologists think that life is so complex that many of them think that you will not find life outside the solar system. Probably the truth is somewhere in between. I think actually highly complex systems that are essential for biology are much more difficult to build and sustain than most astronomers may think. But I hope it's not impossible. So I think actually the thermodynamics and basic physics chemistry in establishing the physical, initial parameters will get you, I think, reasonable models as hypotheses.
All right, thank you, Daniel. Daniel is actually here. His office is second floor. If you pass the director's office and department office and toward the north, you can find Daniel. We can talk to him after the meeting. Thank you very much. We'll see you next week.